Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to go through checking and adjusting the valves on this 2006 CRF 450. Process should be the same for the 02 to 08 450, but make sure to check your specs so they are in line. The owner of this bike could only start it if you pop started it, and was checking it out. The compression should be way better than this on a 450. I shouldn't be able to do that with my hand. Not that good anyhow. I almost just made a mistake in front of the camera. I was gonna take the fuel line off before the petcock here, and we would have just dumped that tank all over the place. I need to take this side of the fuel line off towards the carburetor. Just twist it a little bit and then pull. It'll come off nice and easy. Now we should be able to lift our tank up and out. Make sure the petcock doesn't catch. That's held on real nice. Now we need to pull off our breather tube right here. Just pull the clamp back, pull the breather tube off, and position it out of your way. Pull your spark plug cap, and get that out of your way as well. Now for the head cover, there are three 10mm bolts. Now we can pull this head cover up and out. Now we need to remove the cover over the primary drive gear. This is a 10mm Allen wrench. And it looks like we have a little too much oil in this bike. And smell it, see if it smells like gas. It does not. Just appears that it's actually been overfilled here. Now we'll remove the inspection plug on the electrical side of the bike. This is where we're going to see our timing mark. Now there's a punch mark on the primary drive gear over here. You're going to line that up with the arrow underneath the cover that you just opened up. You're turning the motor over clockwise. If your valves are tight at this point, you're going to want to go around another 360 degrees. I'll measure the exhaust valves. I like to measure in millimeters because that's what the shims are measured in. So we've got 0.28 right here on both our exhaust valves. Over here on our right intake, we have 0.10, but our left intake we can't get a measurement on. So my smallest feeler gauge comes down to 0.03. I'm going to assume we're at 0.02 and adjust the shim based on that. Now we need to break the cam gear loose. So with the engine of the bike, we can only get to one of the bolts. You also notice here that you've got an indicator mark and an arrow. Those should be lined up during this process. But yeah, we're gonna break this one bolt loose. We're not gonna take it all the way out. Then we're gonna rotate this gear 180 degrees, break the other one loose. At that point, we will start taking the cam tensioner out to get the tension off the chain and complete removing the cam gear. I'm holding the engine still with the socket that with the Allen that I'm using on the other side, so I can break this loose. Now I'll rotate the cam. Loosen the other bolt. Do this while it's still on the bike. Take the dust cover bolt off in the center. Instead, I like to take the bolt on the inside out first. And we'll start loosening the other one. As you continue to take this out, it'll start pushing itself out, or at least it should, as long as the spring is working correctly. Now we take the cam gear bolts all the way out. So we got the one, now we need to rotate the engine again. I would recommend bringing it around so there's no pressure on the intake valve. So you're probably gonna have to go about 180. And make sure you don't drop these down into the engine. You can just set the cam gear down right now. You can set your bolts aside. Now we need to remove that gear, but we don't want to drop the chain down. Some people will drop the chain down and grab it with a magnet, but the problem is we're rolling this motor over. It can get bound up on the crank. It can fall off of the gear on the crank. So we want to keep tension on that. So what I'm going to do is remove this gear while holding up on the chain. Pay attention to how it came off. Again, your marks are on the outside. There's a recess facing out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bungee cord through that. Just a small bungee. And actually, I like to throw a bearing on it. So I've just got an old bearing that I pulled out of, it was actually a clutch pressure plate. And then I'll wrap this up around the frame so it'll hold it. And now that chain keeps tension on it, it's actually sitting on a bearing. As we roll this motor over, it'll turn along with it. Now we'll take the 4 cam bolts off. We'll crack each of them loose in a crisscross pattern. Now I like to make sure that they're actually the same length. So you'll notice that the exhaust side is actually a little bit longer than the inside. So we'll remember that. Now we pull our cam holder. Now there's buckets on the intake side. They may come up with this. So you want to pay attention to that. Be careful that nothing falls. And they have. So I stuck my fingers underneath it so they didn't fall out. They also took the shims with them. And you want to pay attention to which one went in what side, because we need to figure out exactly what we need to change now to make this work. Alright, so in the case of this bike, the exhaust valves were actually still in spec. The one intake valve was completely out of spec. We don't even really know exactly where it's at. And the other intake valve, it was tighter than spec. We're supposed to be 0.13 as a minimum, and we're actually 0.10. So we need to make an adjustment on both of them. We want to get as close to that 0.19 as possible because that gives it more room to wear. The exhaust, that range is 0.25 to 0.31. Again, this is millimeters. We were at 0.28. So we're really about the middle of the range. I'm going to leave those alone. They'll stay in the bike. So now we need to figure out what we need to do to make our adjustments. So this was the left intake valve. Our shim is in there. We're going to grab that. And it's marked. Sometimes you can read them, sometimes you can't. This is 0.160. So I'm going to write that down now. So my left intake, the shim in it, is 0.160. Side. Now I'm going to take a look at my right intake valve, or my right intake shim. Our right intake shim we cannot read, so we have to measure it. Unfortunately, I misplaced my metric set of calipers, so I've actually got to do it in standard and then convert it. So I've got 0.069, and I need to figure out what that is. So I'm going to plug it into Google and figure it out. So I'm just going to grab my phone, go to Google, and type inches to millimeters. Search, and we come up with a calculator. In inches, I put 0.069, and I find out that that's 1.75 millimeters, so that has to be a 1.75. So now I'll write that down as well. So we know our right intake was 0.10, and we would like to be at a minimum of 0.13, maximum of 0.19. So really I want 0.19. So I need to go 0.09. So to get there, with my shim being a 0.175 right now, I'm gonna wanna go to about a 0.185. That might be too much. It would be super close. I did my math wrong. Actually, I have to go with a 0.165. Make it a little bit smaller, so I'm making my gap bigger. So this is the 0.165. Again, this was the right intake valve. So that is this side. Actually, I'll go set it in the bike right now because we're gonna need it set there before we put this back on. The other side, we had to assume that it's a 0.02. So I need to go 0.17. We had a 0.160 in it. So at this point, we need to move this 0.17. We've got to go down about to a 0.145. So that's actually going to move us 0.15, not 0.17 like I was looking for. But that should get us to 0.17. Again, our range is 0.13 to 0.19. So that puts us towards the larger of the two, which is where I want to go with it. And if we went further, we would probably be past it. Now, all this being said, I'm only guessing at the 0.2. So I might want to rethink this real quick. I may actually want to go with a 0.1 or a 1.4. Seeing how I couldn't get a feeler gauge in there and I'm only guessing, I am going to go with a 1.4 and we'll see how it does. If it's not right, I'll have to take it back apart and change it. So I'll set this in the bike. All right, now at this point, we put the cam back on. Well, we just have to have the cam in a position where it won't have any pressure on the valve. So we're going to want those lobes facing up. Flip it over, keep our fingers over that to make sure the buckets don't slide out. We make sure this cam is in a position like this so it's not going to push down on the valves. So I'd say right about here. So if you bring it up here, we're going to push on the exhaust valves. So we want it down in this area where we're not putting pressure on the exhaust or the intake valves as we bring this down. There's two locator pins on this. So before you end up putting the bolts in it, you want to take a look around and make sure all of your mating surfaces are touching. Make sure that one's not holding up so you're not binding something as you're tightening the bolts. Remember, we said our exhaust bolts were a little bit longer for the exhaust side and the intake bolts were a little bit shorter. And for the cam holder, the torque specs are 10 foot-pounds for these bolts. I recommend torquing them down before you check the gap for your valves. So I'll start by checking these about halfway through the range. I'm going to start with 0.15 millimeters. I've got 0.15 on the right. It appears I do not on the left. So now I'll step it up to 0.18 on the right. See if I've got that. I can get it in there, but it's pretty tight, so I'm probably forcing that one a little bit. So I would say we're at 0.17, 0.18, which is about where we thought we were going to be. Now we need to remeasure the left one again, so we'll drop it down to 0.13. We do not have 0.13. Oil drop to 0.04. No 0.04. Our smallest one is 0.03. These are getting super thin now. So we're right back where we started with this. Remember, we were at, I believe, 0.160? Yes, we were at 0.160 and we dropped it to 0.140. That means our next move is actually drop this to 0.120. That's the smallest shim that we have. This head, if that works, is pretty much in need of a rebuild. Like, the next step after this is it needs to have the valves done. So now we need to go back through the process, pull this apart, change that shim to the 0.120, put it back together, and measure it again. I've changed this left intake shim to the 0.120. Now I'm getting ready to put the cam back on. Alright, this time I'm going to start with the 0.13 because that's our minimum and we can't adjust this anymore. So that has to fit or this bike needs head work. See what we got. Oh, it's magic. This one actually goes in. Alright, now let's see what our spec is actually at. So we've got 0.18. Now let's just make sure that we don't have more than that. So this is 0.20. And we can actually squeak that one in there. It feels like I'm forcing it though. So I would say we were at about max. I believe it was 0.19. Yes, 0.19 should be max. That means that thing's adjusted about as far as it can go. This is going to work. This is going to work well. However, the guy that owns this bike really needs to think about actually doing the valves on this. And now we can check the gap on our decompression. So we're looking for around 0.25, which is, and we are good. So there's no pressure on that right now. That should be good. At this point, we need to put our cam chain gear back on. Now this is where it gets important that we're going to line up these two marks along with the arrows on the side of the cam holder as we put this cam chain on. We also want to make sure that the motor hasn't turned at all, which I don't believe it should have, but we'll check real quick. So I made sure the engine was at top dead center. It actually had rolled off just a little bit. So I lined the punch mark up on the primary drive gear and ensured that my line was in line over here as well. So now what we're going to do is, I've already got my bolts ready in my hand here for that cam chain gear, or cam gear rather. I'm going to remove this bungee while holding the cam chain. Grab my gear. I have to get it in here, and I'll probably have to jump it around a little bit here. But we're gonna try to get our line 90 degrees right here. Set the cam chain on. Let's see how well that lines up. Well, I'm a little high right now. I'm gonna have to jump this gear back. It appears to be a tooth, so I'm gonna drop it down a little bit, just move one tooth, and walk this chain around. Alright, now that's in line with our mark. We just got to turn the cam just a hair so we can actually get our bolts in. Rather than just try to get this bolt in, I'm going to go get the Allen wrench that'll fit this to help ensure that I don't drop it down to the engine. If I drop it down there, it's going to suck. I'm going to hope that I can go down there with a magnet and catch it, but if I can't, I'm going to have to pull the side cover off. Don't want to do that. That's on there. Just slide that in and get that screw to start. Now you don't want that super tight. You're not torquing it down right now because you still got to get the other one in. I'm actually going to back it up just a hair from where I got it, so I can hopefully start this other bolt. And I'm going to try to do that without flipping it over here. Unfortunately, you can't use the socket if you do it this way, so you might want to spin it around. But I actually did get it started. So now I'm going to roll this motor around. Now I'll snug this up. Now that we've got both of the bolts started, we're going to torque them down for the cam chain, or for the cam gear right here. Torque spec on this is 15 foot-pounds. Now we'll install the cam chain tensioner. Screw this in. It'll pull the plunger back. And then we've got to hold that screwdriver while we put this guy in. They do make a tool for this, but you can also do it this way. One bolt. And make sure we get it all the way down there to hold it in. Grab your other bolt and do the same. If you find that you can't get to start, you might want to loosen that one back up just a hair so you can pivot it. Fortunately, I had it lined up nice. Then you can release the screwdriver. You should hear it snap back, and your cam chain should be tightened now. We'll go check, make sure that we're at top dead center on the compression stroke, so your cam, the lobe should be up. So I'm going to check that dimple on the primary drive gear on the other side, make sure that's lined up, as well as these are still lined up. So I can see that's lined up right now. The mark is still lined up. You should also have a mark over here on the flywheel. Logically, I don't see how we could be off. And the mark is still lined up. We need to tighten these bolts down. More than likely, these are about 7 foot-pounds. I've got a pretty good feel for them. So I'm just going to do this by hand. We need to put our dust cover bolt back in. While we're over here, we can go ahead and throw this plug back in. Now we should be able to feel good compression, and we should run the motor over a couple times and make sure nothing binds or anything like that. That feels much better than it did earlier. Put this cover back on. Now we can put our head cover back on. Make sure the gasket is where it belongs. There it is. Once it's seated on nicely, you can add the bolts. The seal on the spark plug might fight you a little bit, so it might help to push on that as you're putting it on. So we had 3 bolts. The longer ones went towards the exhaust side. Reinstall our spark plug cap. And the breather. And then the clamp. And the shoehorn our tank in. Remember to drag the petcock down and through. Now let's see if we can get it fired with a kickstart.
Calm before the storm. You know what's coming, so be warned. You can't stop me now.
This is the sheet that I created that'll help you figure out what shims you need whether you're adjusting your valves. There's a link in the end of the video on the top right of the screen that'll show you how to use this sheet. There's also a link in the description that'll get you a copy of this sheet that you can use. So, like I said, this thing would not run without pop starting it. Obviously we took care of that, so that's a win. Hopefully this video helped you. If you would, it would help me if you would like and subscribe to this video. Subscribe more than anything. I need to build my subscriber base. Thanks for watching. We